So you want to retire at some point, and you've probably got a certain quality of life in mind. But do you know if you're saving enough each month to get you there? Or are you marching blindly on, doing your best and hoping it'll be enough? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how to work out how much you'd need to save each month to achieve your goals, and how you can use this information to help you feel much more in control and to drive the change that you need in your life. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is James. I am a financial planner, and this is a place where you can learn to make smarter financial decisions. Working out how much you need to save each month to achieve certain targets is a very hard calculation to make. So I've actually built a calculator that can do all of this for you. But before we get into this data, I want to give you some context on why it is so important to know what your goals are and whether you're on track to achieve them. Most people go through life without much planning. They're trying their best and they're just hoping that things will turn out all right. It's a very fatalistic approach that rarely ends up getting you to where you want to be. And it also leaves you with this uneasy feeling that you should be doing more about your future. And this is a feeling that only grows as you get older. It's very much like having a niggling pain in your chest that's been slowly getting worse over time. You know you should get it checked out, but you fear what the doctor might find, so you put it off. But that is not rational at all, because if it turns out that you do have a problem, then each month that goes by is only making it worse. And on the flip side, if it turns out that actually everything is fine, well, you've been worrying for no reason at all. Now, when it comes to saving for retirement, most people are not doing enough to get to where they think they want to be. So when we get into the details later and you find out whether you are on track, be prepared for the fact that you might not be. But the important thing is what you do with this knowledge. Do you admit defeat and start blaming externalities and other things that are outside of your control? Or do you recognize that you are in charge of your own decisions and instead start thinking of ways that you can get back to where you need to be? The first habit in Dr. Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, is be proactive. Proactive people recognize that they are responsible. They don't blame circumstances, conditions, or conditioning for their behavior. They know that they can choose their behavior. Reactive people, on the other hand, are often affected by their physical environment. They find external sources to blame for their behavior. So if you want to be proactive about building yourself a good life, the first thing you need to do is actually work out what a good life is. Because I can bet that the number that you've got in your head right now, whether that be 20k or 40k per year, it does not represent a good life. It just represents a number that you think will make you happy based on either what you're spending right now or based on what other people that you aspire to be like are spending. So the first step is to really interrogate this and make sure that the destination that you're heading for is where you actually want to be. As it happens, the second habit of highly effective people is to begin with the end in mind. If you want to live your life more deliberately, you need to start with the end goal in mind and work back from that to find the best route to get there. We often spend too much time focusing on simply moving forwards from where we are now, climbing up the ladder from one rung to the next, without any regard to whether this ladder will actually get us to where we want to be, when instead we should start with what we want our lives to look like and then work back from there to look at all the different routes that we could take to get there, to find one that works for us. I'm telling you this now because when we get into the data and you see how much you actually need to save to achieve your goals, you'll probably be quite shocked. But instead of being reactive, I want you to be proactive, first by assessing whether you actually need that much, and then by starting to think about the different ways that you could go about achieving these goals. So now let's get into the data. In a video that I did last month, I did a backtest of over 100 years of stock market data to work out how much you would need to have invested at the point of retirement to give you a high chance of achieving 3 different levels of income. In this test, we assumed that our life expectancy would be to 95 years old, that our portfolio was invested in 60% stocks and 40% bonds, that we also had a 2-year cash buffer, that we were going to get the full state pension at age 67, and we wanted a 95% success rating, which means that the plan needed to not run out of money in at least 95% of historical scenarios. And these were the results that we got. If you wanted to retire at 55 and be able to sustain an expenditure of 20k per year, you would need 410k in total, including a 40k cash buffer. But if you delayed retirement until 65, you only needed 239k. For 40k per year, retiring at 55, you would have needed 1.1 million or 760k at 65. For 60k per year, you would have needed 1.85 million or 1.3 million if you retired at 65. And the next step in this process is to then work out how much you'd actually need to save each month from where you are now to end up with these amounts. And to do this, we need to know 4 things. Firstly, what is your starting balance? What is your target balance? How many years do you have left until retirement? And importantly, what rate of investment growth should we assume? Now, given that we each have unique circumstances, I've created a calculator that you can use to test this with your own details. We have our 4 variables across the top. The first 3 should be pretty self-explanatory. As an example, let's say that we are 25 years old. We're starting from scratch and we want to retire at 60 with an expenditure of £20,000 per year. Well, according to our backtest, that would have required £322,000 at retirement. The final thing that we then need to decide on is what growth rate to assume. Now, if you are a 100% stocks and shares investor, you might think about using a 8% average annual return per year, but that would not account for inflation. So here we are looking at historical data over the last 50 years of the annualized real returns of different types of globally diversified investment portfolios. This is generic data that is based on indexes, and we can see that over the last 50 years, which includes the high inflationary environment of the 1970s and 1980s, a 100% equity portfolio achieved a 6.5% real return, whilst a 60% equity portfolio achieved a 5.8% annualized return. In our example, we are a 60% equity investor, so let's use 5.8%. But we then need to discount for investment fees, so let's take 0.5% off this figure. We also want to be conservative because we may end up getting lower returns in the future, so let's give this a further discount of 1/4 to bring our growth rate down to 4%. And if we plug this into the calculator, it tells us that to achieve our goal of 322k at retirement, we would need to save £364 per month, or a total of £4,372 per year. When comparing these figures with your own monthly saving, you need to remember that the pension contributions that you and your employer are making will already be making up a pretty big chunk of this. I've designed this calculator so that you can investigate different variables without the need to run multiple calculations over and over. These 2 columns here show you the effects of retiring 5 years earlier or 5 years later, whilst the rows show you the results of increasing or decreasing your target amount by 10%. I've also included this chart to help you visualize these differences. So we can see that if we wanted to retire 5 years later at age 65, we could decrease our contributions from £364 per month to £282. But if we wanted to bring our retirement forwards to 55, we'd then need to up these to £478. So if we were able to increase our contributions by 70% from £282 to £478, we could potentially retire 10 years earlier. Now, the drawback to this approach is that it assumes you'll be saving the same amount each month, but in reality, we know that it's likely that you'll be saving less at the beginning and ramping it up towards the end. But let's say that you are 30 years old now and you've just started a family, so saving is pretty hard. Well, you could just make an assumption that by 40 you'd have, let's say, £70,000 saved. And then you can go on to explore what more you would need to do from that point. You'll also notice that the later on you are in your journey, the bigger effect pushing your retirement date out by 5 years has. As you can see in this example, to retire at 60, we would need to save £472 per month. But if we push our retirement date out to 65, it drops dramatically to only £271. There is a link to this calculator down in the description of this video, so I suggest that you make a copy of it and start playing around with it for yourself. And please do let me know what you find down in the comments and how it makes you feel. Now, when I first started doing this analysis for my own goals, it filled me with dread because it was very clear that I was not doing anywhere near enough to get me to where I wanted to be. But instead of admitting defeat, I went back to review the values that I was targeting, and I realized that the figures that I was looking at were really just plucked from thin air. So I really thought about how I want to live my life, where I want to live, and what I want to be doing, and importantly, how much that would all cost. And I found that I probably needed much less than I originally thought. Even so, I was still not doing enough. But I knew that this is where I wanted to get to, so I started to investigate how I might go about it. And instead of looking at ways to save more on my existing salary, which obviously has its limitations, I started to look at ways that I could grow my income. And I realized that there were much better directions that I could be taking my career that would not only give me a better chance of getting me to where I wanted to be, but they would also make the journey along the way much, much more enjoyable. And over the last 2 years, I've been investing in myself and slowly getting myself onto a ladder that will get me to where I want to be. So when you look at these figures, there's a high chance that you'll find that you are not doing enough and you may be disappointed, but at least you'll know. And you'll no longer be fumbling around in the dark, hoping that you'll just happen to end up in the right place. But the important thing is what you do with this knowledge. Do you sit back and blame externalities, or do you take ownership of your future?